further ado, I'll introduce Senator Gary Peters. Senator, we're very we're very grateful to have you here with us today. We do have some questions on our core issues that we're hoping to ask you, but if you'd like to introduce yourself and if you have any opening remarks, we'd love to hear them.
Well, I appreciate it, Luke. Eileen, thank you for your leadership, and everybody on the call. It's a privilege to be with you here today. And as you said, we have to adjust this onto a Zoom. We'd much rather be face to face, and I can't wait till we get back to face meetings. I'm zoomed out, probably like all of you. Let's hope we get through this crisis as quickly as we possibly can. I'll be brief because I want to make sure that I have a chance to answer your questions about primarily how we're getting through. I suspect how we need to get through this crisis, and then other broader issues that I know you will want to discuss. Just say that I've been intimately involved in dealing with the COVID response. I serve as the ranking member, which means I'm the top Democrat on Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs. And so part of the work on overseeing the Department of Homeland Security means that we oversee FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management folks that deal with natural disasters. So, engage from hurricanes to wildfires to the floods, but also been tasked with the federal response to the COVID crisis. So from day one, we've been working closely with the folks at FEMA to provide essential equipment for us here in the state. And as we know, we were hit very early and very hard in March as one of the areas, along with New York City and New Jersey, and the challenges associated with getting personal protection equipment to protect folks, particularly our healthcare providers that were on the front end, testing supplies, so all of those issues to deal with the crisis. And we still have a lot of work to do. We're focused on whether or not we are building up supply chains, domestic supply chains, to be able to provide these materials. Clearly, it was shown that we did not have that kind of supply base to deal with something as significant as a pandemic. And actually, I wrote a report that last year, my committee staff, we put together a report. We were looking primarily at that time on chronic drug shortages that we have in our country. And this should not be happening in the United States of America, where we have shortages of critical drugs. It's not unusual for hospitals every week to basically have a meeting and they determine which drugs are going to be in shortage that week, and then how do they work around that. And oftentimes when they do that, they find drugs that aren't as clinically as effective as the one that they're replacing, and they tend to cost more money. So it's a really kind of a lose-lose situation. We've got to deal with it. And basically, long and short of the long study, it's because of our over-dependence on foreign sources. In fact, the precursors, the chemicals that go into most all of the drugs that we use are manufactured overseas, mostly in China. We're really dependent on China for that, and including surgical masks, all sorts of gowns, all sorts of equipment. And in the report that I put out last year, I concluded, among other conclusions, that when there is a pandemic in the United States, we're going to be in a very precarious situation. Little did I know at that time, just a few months after we put out the report, here we are. And so we need to be working to bring a lot of that production back on shore to make sure that we have the ability to look at this as a homeland security issue. One, it's going to create a lot of great jobs in this country, which is great. And as Michigan as a manufacturing powerhouse, and we know how to make stuff, as you know, better than anyone. It also, I think, it will be an opportunity for us to grow our economy and create good paying jobs, but also securing our future going forward. So that's going to be a major effort of mine going forward, and just an example of what we need to deal with that front. I've also was very active in some of the COVID relief. In fact, the Pandemic Assistance Act is a law that I wrote that expands unemployment eligibility to folks who wouldn't normally qualify for unemployment. You normally have to be with a company that's paying into the unemployment fund, but my Pandemic Assistance Act was actually put into the CARES Act. So the idea that a lot of folks were able to get unemployment that weren't able to get it before. If you were a small business owner, if you're an independent contractor, if you're someone like an Uber driver, suddenly you now have no income, you're in desperate shape. How do we make sure that we keep food on the table and a roof over the head of folks who lost their job for no fault of their own? I was pleased to get that language in, and it helped hundreds of thousands of folks in our state. we need to continue to provide assistance because people are still hurting. And I'm sure I'll hear from you as to what you're seeing in your communities. We need an additional package to provide additional relief for families, for small businesses that are struggling to hang on. We need more relief for health providers and rural hospitals in particular. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to come to that agreement, which is unacceptable to me. And we've got a president now that says, oh, wait till after the election, which makes no sense to me. We should be doing this now. We can wait for a Supreme Court justice after the election. We can't
Right,
wait for
right.
additional COVID. That's what we need to have right
Mhm.
now is that help for folks. So the priorities are not what I would agree with. We're going to keep pressing. Hopefully we'll be able to come up with something, but we must do this. And, you know, even the economists are, and regardless of the political persuasion of the economists too, they're saying you got to make sure you keep the economy afloat. Because if it starts going in a hole, as you know, it's a whole lot harder to dig out of a hole, and the deeper the hole is, even more expensive and more problematic. So you have my commitment. I'm going to do everything I can to my power. But right now, we do have issues with the majority in the Senate that have other priorities. Hopefully, we can get that to change in the weeks ahead. I'm going to stop talking because otherwise, I'll be given a Senate filibuster. I don't want to do that. I want to hear what's on your mind. I want to hear your questions and answer what I can, or your comments of what you think we should be thinking about and doing. But you are all, I just want to wrap up and say, you know, you are all spiritual leaders. You're all incredible community leaders in your community. I know you have the pulse of the community and you represent the heart and soul of the community. So it's indeed an honor for me to have an opportunity to spend some time with you tonight, and hope we can make this a regular type of an event.
Thank you, Senator. And I do hope that, yeah, that hope we can meet with you again
Yeah,
post election. You know, assuming you
absolutely.
win, or you know, even if you don't win, we'd like to keep in touch.
Yeah, I'll still hang out with you.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
still from Michigan, right?
yeah.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
So we do have a few questions though we'd like to get to, and the first is going to come from Pastor Sharon East Jackson. Pastor Jackson serves at Vernon Chapel in Detroit, and she has a question regarding healthcare.
Sure.
Yes, my question really has to deal with the Affordable Care Act and with the possibility that it may be repealed if, in fact, well, that it's up for review in the Supreme Court.
Mhm.
And right now, having been a person that had never been without health insurance
Mhm.
before, but now affected by this pandemic since my husband was unemployed, so we lost insurance, and someone that has pre-existing conditions, wondering what um, what are we doing about that? What are some of the things that you all are doing to try to help to make sure that those of us who have pre-existing conditions will still be covered? And what are some of the things that we can do to make sure that that this law is not repealed?
Well, thank you for the question, and hopefully it won't be because, as you stated, it's critically important for folks across the state, and the numbers are huge in the amount of impact that people are going to have. And I'll tell you, we've been dealing with this. I was proud to support President Obama and vote for the Affordable Care Act when it went through, but there have been repeated attempts, as you know, to repeal this, and even when it was close to repeal, it was clear that folks who had this notion of repeal and replace, it was clear they have no idea how to replace it. There's no plan whatsoever. So it's frightening for folks who talk about it. They had their chance. They've had a lot of years to try to come up with something different, and they haven't. And it could all come to the Affordable Care Act could indeed be declared unconstitutional by a Supreme Court. And we have a nominee. In fact, just before I tuned in, I was able to listen in a little bit to the confirmation hearing. Senator Cory Booker was asking her questions specifically about Affordable Care Act and others. So the case comes before the Supreme Court about a week or so after the election. If she is appointed prior to the election, she will be sitting in on that case. We know from her writings as a law professor that she believes that the court had made mistakes, and Justice Roberts had made a mistake to uphold the Affordable Care Act, and so it's likely, highly likely, that she would vote to basically have it null and void and declared unconstitutional, which of course I disagree with wholeheartedly. But she will have that vote, and with the other justices that are there, I think it's in real danger of going down if she is confirmed. So if that goes down, we have to act quickly to restore a bill that's going to pass constitutional muster, and we need to be committed to some central notions of coverage. When you think about the Affordable Care Act now, just to put it in the context of the impact on our fellow community members, is that part of the Affordable Care Act is the expansion of Medicaid, which I think roughly 800,000 people in the state of Michigan now have health care because of that. People who now have pre-existing conditions and are protected and can have insurance coverage. There's 1.7 million people in that category. Senior citizens get relief through closing the donut hole, which deals with prescription drugs. They have lower priced drugs. Families can keep children on till age 26 on their health insurance policy, which is critically important as young folk get on their feet and start getting ready to fly away from the nest. They know they have healthcare coverage for a period of time, which is critical. The essential benefits, all of those things are basically at risk. So we will have to look to see how the Supreme Court rules if they do throw it out, and then be focused on how we reinstate it. You know, the problem, part of it is the insurance mandate is a critical piece of dealing with pre-existing conditions, is that you had to say everybody has to have insurance. Now we have to make sure it's affordable. And so the state exchanges and all that was important. But in order to maintain pre-existing conditions, you have to require healthcare. It's similar to auto insurance. When you think about it, everybody's required to have auto insurance. If you drive a car, you have to buy auto insurance in Michigan. But when it comes to health coverage, we have to make sure it's affordable. There's a lot of other issues. That's a state issue with the affordability of car insurance. We could talk about that, but I use the concept. And the reason you have to require everybody to have it, because you can't say you only need insurance after you've had an accident. You know, that's not sustainable. So you can't have a car and then run into a tree and then call up and say, I want insurance now, so you'll pay for the damage to the car. You know, that doesn't work that way. Everybody's got to pay into the system in order to maintain it. And the one thing about health coverage, though, that's different than auto coverage. Auto coverage, you may or may not get an accident. The one thing we know about health, unfortunately, we will all get sick at some point in our life. None of us are going to be able to avoid getting sick. That's the human condition, which is why we got to have an affordable system where people pay, and then make sure those who can't afford it have the subsidies and the help to be able to afford it. That's something that's as the court case right now. So how we will adapt to that, we'll have to see should that happen. But know that we are committed. I've been committed since day one in passing the Affordable Care Act. And I don't need to tell everybody on this call, folks were really angry about the Affordable Care Act when it passed and made it very difficult to pass. And now they really like it. They realize how important it really is for folks to have that affordable care. So this will be we'll see how it develops, but it's a reason why we've got to make sure we're electing folks who are committed to restoring the Affordable Care Act immediately after, if it is indeed overturned by the Supreme Court, and restoring it in a way that maintains the critical protections that have been working for Michiganders since it passed, and it's critical. So
thank you, Senator.
Thank you for that question. Really important. I know it's on everybody's mind right now, especially with this nomination going on right now.
And many of us on this call were involved in a fight back in the day to expand Medicaid here in Michigan, right. which was a pretty big fight.
Absolutely, yeah.
So our next question is from Reverend Dinah Haig. Reverend Haig is pastor of First Congregational Church in Frankfort, Michigan, which is up north. If you don't know where Frankfort is,
I know where Frankfort is. I do. Yeah.
Reverend,
I had a friend in college from Frankfort. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah. And she has a question about affordable housing. Reverend Dinah, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Hi, Senator, and thank you so much for taking time to speak to us today. I'm Dinah Haig, as you know, pastor of the Congregational Church here in the great small town of Frankfort. And as I'm sure you're aware, so many towns and areas that draw people often become inhabited by a large number of wealthy people, which is not bad, but that situation often crowds out those of lower income that are needed to keep up the character of this beautiful state. Mm-hmm. Knowing that state fundings are in part dependent on federal fundings, do you have any information or insight for us in terms of affordable housing so we can sustain a good quality of life for everyone?
Well, you're right, Dana, and I want to answer something kind of a two-part, if I may, on it. And first, my concerns about affordable housing getting through this COVID crisis. Back to why we need to have another COVID package to help people. As you know, many people are really hurt right now. They are unable to make rent payments or mortgage payments in some of the housing that they're in right now. There is a moratorium that's part of the legislation that prevents anyone from being evicted during this time through the end of the year. But there's a real challenge ahead for us because even though there is a moratorium on evictions, the rent does still come due. And when you think about folks who are struggling and can't pay their rent now, thankfully they can stay in the home and have a roof over their head. But when the moratorium has come to an end, they're going to have to make up all those payments. And most folks aren't going to be able to do that. And we're going to have a lot of evictions. People are going to be losing their homes if we don't act. It's a serious issue that I worry a great deal about. Part of the COVID package that we are working on to get passed through my fellow Democratic caucus in particular pushing is to make sure there's actual rent relief so people can get relief from that rent when it does come due because they've been unemployed or suffering challenges from employment. And also mortgage payments. We also have a bill to be able to keep people in their homes because if suddenly people are losing their homes, you know what that will do to a community as folks are being evicted or homes are being foreclosed on. It'll create also a significant economic strain on our community. So that's first and foremost on my mind in terms of housing assistance in the short run. But in the longer run, you're absolutely right. We have a lot of areas in Michigan that the real estate prices are high because of vacation properties, as you mentioned, particularly in beautiful places like Frankfurt, where folks want to be there. So how do we support low affordable housing and lower the cost of making the building those structures to expand that? So I'm co-sponsor on a number of pieces of legislation to provide tax credits for investors to invest in affordable housing throughout the country. It is a huge problem, not just in communities in our state, but all over the country. So we are hoping to enact that to provide private investment to come in at a cost that would make sense that they would then be able to lease those properties out and rent those, and they'd be required to at affordable prices within those communities. I will say, that's the federal is some of the financing issues, but there are a lot of local issues dealing with zoning and some of the, which is making it difficult in some of our residential areas. That local zoning ordinances sometimes make it difficult to expand affordable housing in a community. And so this is truly, I'm sure you're engaged with this in your communities. This is one of those local, state, and federal issues that we all have to come together and work on. I'm going to be working on the federal aspects, which are usually the financial aspects, to make it so it makes so we can spur investment and create incentives for people to invest in those properties. But we have to deal with some of the local issues like zoning, and I'm happy to work with you on those issues. I don't have a direct say on that because it's not something we do in Washington, but working with local officials as to how we maximize grants and investment opportunities in local communities to make sure that affordable housing is available to the residents.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, I mean, this is a huge issue all over our state that doesn't seem like anyone's talking about. So I think it's going to be a big deal for a long time.
It's going to be a really big deal in January when you start seeing people evicted.
Yeah. Our next question is from Pastor Derek Knox, who is the pastor of Church of the Elohim in Lansing. Pastor Knox, you'll have to unmute yourself. I will also mention real quick while Pastor Knox is unmuting himself, we have clergy from all over the state here and many different faith traditions. I would love for you all to introduce yourselves in the chat with your title and where you are. I forgot to mention that at the start, but if you don't mind introducing yourselves in the chat, clergy that are on here so we can see who's here, that'd be great. Pastor Knox.
Hello, Senator Peters. Thank you all for putting this together, Eileen, Luke. A question I have is around the National Criminal Justice Commission Act that you submitted. The question is, like, where are you all with that bill? But also, I read through, the document that I read through was about 22 pages, but it was still a little vague and general. Like, what are the specifics around that? And does it include, like, more rights for those that are currently incarcerated? What type of reform is really around that act?
Yes, and it's just the Criminal Justice Act that I'm the author of, not broadly. I'll just focus on that, but it's got to be, it's a piece of what has to be broad criminal justice reform that we need to move forward. And there are a number of things that we know that we need to do in terms of police reform, for example, immediately. They don't need additional studies, don't need additional reports. Certainly things like banning chokeholds, that doesn't have a place in police activities, and certainly what we saw with George Floyd and the knee on his neck, which is something that certainly will be ingrained in my mind for the rest of my life, as I'm sure most Americans. We have to stop those kinds of practices. Other things that we can do right now that have to be done, there's a long list, but an example is we need independent investigations whenever a police officer has been accused of wrongdoing. The investigation should be outside of a department. Too many of these investigations, as you know, are done within a department. And the perception, either real or not, but it's even if it's out there, it's real, that the departments will not bring a fresh eye to the allegations. And instead, you might have the good old boy network that takes care of folks, and justice is not dispensed. We can't allow that. We have to make sure that fresh eyes are there and justice is dispensed, because it's ultimately it's about building trust in the community. Law enforcement, first responders need the trust of the community. If trust is breached, as you know, Pastor, it takes a long time to regain trust. So it's very important to do that up front. But let me get to the commission. So the commission that I've been working on, and it's already passed the Senate once. We're hoping to get it passed again and over to the House, is really a step back. Not the immediate. We have to do the immediate things right now. This is not an alternative to doing stuff, but there are things we do need to provide more study and bring stakeholders together with and then have concrete action items. They're more likely to pass those concrete items through the Congress as well if it's done in a bipartisan way, and you have all the stakeholders all around the table. So the National Criminal Justice Commission does something we have not done in this country for over 50 years. And that's to do a complete top to bottom review of the criminal justice system. The last time we did it, Lyndon Johnson was president back in the 60s during another very challenging time in our country. And that commission came together. They came up with over 200 recommendations. Nearly all of them were adopted because of the process that went in place. So that's what my commission that I've authored does. I have, I think last count, I have 22 co-sponsors, 11 Democrats, 11 Republicans. I have all of the major civil rights groups, the NAACP, the Urban League, National Action Network. I mean, all of the civil rights groups have endorsed it, including all the major police organizations as well, and prosecuting attorneys. So you've got law enforcement, civil rights, Democrats, Republicans, all coming together, creating a commission, which is what you referred to. It's to set kind of goals, but let the commission figure out what is most urgent and how can we come together to solve it. You brought up returning citizens, the issue of dealing with folks as an example. Definitely has to be brought up. We have a huge problem in this country where people who are in the criminal justice system and have done something wrong, and then they serve their time, but when they come out, they can't get a job. They're basically incredibly difficult to get back up on their feet. And in effect, they have a lifetime sentence. And that's not the way the system is supposed to work. That's completely unacceptable. If you've done something wrong, you need to pay your price, but then you get a second chance. That's the way the system is designed. That's the way the criminal justice should work. And you can move on with your life with that second chance. But as you know, Pastor, that's not the way it's working for a vast majority of people who continue to have that stigma associated. And many folks have done something wrong when they were young, and they mature, they grow, and they can lead wonderful, law-abiding lives and families, but they need a second chance. And that's what is something that this commission would address, but the whole range of issues. So, as I said, it passed in the last Congress through the Senate, and then it was up again in this session. Unfortunately, what slowed it down in this session is that President Trump decided to have a commission, but he had a commission only made up of law enforcement folks and only Republicans. That's not going to build the kind of broad consensus we need in order to actually get things done. So hopefully, depending on what happens, we'll be able to in the next Congress be able to move it forward and build the kind of consensus we need, broad-based, law enforcement, civil rights, Democrats, Republicans, we all have to come together to do this together. And something that I focus on a lot in my work in the Senate is we have to work in a bipartisan way. The only way we get real
Right.
long-term solutions is when we all come together and agree. Otherwise, we're in a seesaw back and forth. And something as important as criminal justice reform deserves more than a seesaw. It needs something concrete and lasting.
Right. How can people help or contribute to that commission?
I would encourage you reach out to your local House members for it, because once it passes the Senate, it'll go to the House and we'll need to pass it there. And I'm working for us here in Michigan. Debbie Stab and I are together, so we're already on it. But it's really an issue that House members are not that familiar with. So we'd be happy to provide more details to you in a more granular level. And then when you have an opportunity to talk to your member of the House, talk about how this is the kind of thing we should be thinking about to put in long-term solutions to these tough problems. And when it comes from the Senate, if they would support it, that would be incredibly helpful.
Awesome.
Thank you, Senator. I see we have time for one more question. I do hope that we can meet again post-election.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Next steps and moving forward.
Maybe in person. That'd be great. But that may be a few months.
Yeah.
Yes.
And at some point it will happen. All right.
Yes.
I'm going to ask Pastor Bob Hegdahl, who submitted a question earlier. I don't know, I might be putting him on the spot, but he's an old friend, so I hope that's okay. Pastor Bob Hegdahl had a question about education that he submitted prior to the meeting, and I wonder if you could ask that, Pastor. Pastor Hegdahl's in Clark. He's a Lutheran pastor.
Yep, it's a pleasure to be with you tonight, Senator. And if you can't do this to old friends, who can you do it to?
That's right.
Senator Peters, my question is that the state of Michigan will not be alone in needing to be proactive in preparing to provide resources for the public school systems once the full effect of a modified learning environment is fully understood after the time of this health crisis. It's going to include additional support services for students, teachers, and parents, some that are already in place and some that will arise as the impact of this modified learning model becomes more clear. What type of advanced planning is being dedicated to address this unknown so that Michigan students, teachers, and families will have the resources in place and ready to go when the need arises and any deficiencies or impacts of this learning environment are identified?
So when you're talking about the learning environment, do you mean the mix of online, or do you mean programming? Just give me some clarity there.
It's probably a combination of both, but it's a totally different model of learning that students are having to embrace, that teachers are having to embrace, and the stress and there's probably mental health issues associated with the time and the absence of human contact. There'll be are the learnings that are happening online effective? If they're deemed not to be effective, then what is the preparation in place to address so that the students don't fall behind if they're being promoted to the next grade, but there's some deficiencies in the way that they've been currently learning because of the pandemic, and how can that be addressed in a way that brings the students back up to imagine grade level, or to whatever absence there might be, or whatever support might be needed as a result of this time when people are so isolated and not in a normal school environment.
No, you're right, Pastor. And those are significant issues I worry a great deal about because I think online learning has great potential and could be a piece of it, but people and students need human contact. That's the kind of learning environment that I think is most important. And when you have folks who are not in that school and are trying to keep up online, and a lot of it depends on the situation that they may have at home, the resources they may have. I'm just thinking of even resources when it comes to connectivity. We have a problem that a lot of folks don't have access to high-speed internet to really fully utilize those tools if available. Even the devices, if you have a household that has one computer and 3 children, it's pretty difficult for them to be doing that. We have to provide resources so that every child has access to devices as well. That's part of that learning environment. All of that comes with a price tag. You're right. And that's part of, we did put in additional money in the CARES Act to help schools get through the initial parts of this. We have to do a whole lot more in that area. But I think you bring up another really important point, and that's mental health and having services available to make sure that we're assessing children as to how they're handling the stress of isolation and the stress of a different learning environment that's tough. So those are all things that where the federal government can be helpful from a resource standpoint. Most K-12, as you know, is state function, state funding, but the federal government can provide enhanced resources to fill in the gaps. One gap or one program that I've been a champion of and passionate about is, for example, is reading recovery program, which makes sure that a child is reading at the 4th grade level by the time they're in 4th grade. And as you may know, Pastor, if a child isn't, they have a difficult time catching up their whole life. I mean, it's just so critical that a child read at the 4th grade level in the 4th grade. And I just think of this cohort of students right now who are again entering that 3rd and 4th grade, who are in online environments, will not be getting the kind of personal face-to-face activities associated with reading recovery. This is a real challenge, and we've got to look at how we try to provide those services when these children come back and understand that time is of the essence for them, just the way brain development is. And we're going to have to wrap around in a pretty significant way students. Otherwise, we're going to have a whole generation of folks who are going to have to, are going to be burdened by this for no fault of their own for the rest of their lives. And that's simply unacceptable, simply unacceptable. And so I'm thinking about that program, but you raised certainly a lot of other issues associated with it too. It has to be in a comprehensive way. And it's right for back to the pastor's question, how to get involved. Make sure you're talking to your local House members about this too, because this is why we need to provide more money for public education within another COVID package. Either it's going to happen soon or we're going to be dealing with this early next year. But there's no question that has to be a priority. And I appreciate you raising that because I don't know if that's on the mind of enough people in the Senate, and we have to come together to make that happen.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator, and thanks to all the clergy that asked questions tonight. I do know that the Senator has a TV appearance that he has to get going to. I do hope we can meet again, like I mentioned. These issues that have been raised tonight are issues that we're going to be working on for the foreseeable future. Those of them that are not necessarily on the minds of the Senate, we hope to put on the minds of the Senate. So we appreciate you being here tonight, and we hope we can stay in touch.
Well, absolutely. We can have other meetings like this, but also just feel free to reach out to my staff and Zephany. You can contact Zephany. I think Corey's on the call. I believe Corey's on the call. So if we could get Zephany as my legislative director, and so she's like the conductor, I guess. She manages the staff of all the different sub-disciplines. So if you've got a public education question we can make, or an issue, or you want to get more in depth as to what's happening and how you can be involved, or your thoughts of what we should be doing, she will make sure you're in contact with my education legislative assistant, or if it's criminal justice reform, or any of the issues that have been raised here, we can work. So we don't, we will definitely meet, but in between meetings, we want to actively engage with all of you as well with staff. That's what they're there for. They're passionate about doing that job, and we look forward to working with you.
Well, yeah, we appreciate that. And I see, Corey has put his phone number in the chat. I will send out an email to everybody that's on this call probably tomorrow at some point. And if it's okay with you all, we'll include your contact info in that email as a follow-up. So thank you, Senator. I think that wraps up our time with the Senator. As far as next steps for Michigan Faith in Action, those of you that don't know either me or Eileen can expect a phone call or an email to set up a meeting with us in the near future. We are organizing locally, right? So Senator Peters mentioned the need to put pressure on our local US Congress folks. There's also an enormous need for local organizing at the state level to push the state legislature on some of our issues. We recently had a pretty big victory where we were able to get some voting rights legislation passed here in Michigan, in large part because of a letter that many of you signed on to and some pressure we were able to put on the Senate Majority Leader, who is in Jackson, by organizing right there in Jackson with clergy in his district. So if you're not engaged in our local organizing, please contact us.
I'm going to jump off. Corey's still on here from my staff, but thank you, everybody. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for all your leadership. It's really a pleasure. I look forward to meeting again soon.
Thank you,
Take
Senator.
care.
Thank
Thank you, Gary.